Aisha walked through the school gates, her eyes low and her steps quiet. She wore simple clothes, nothing fancy, just a plain white shirt and blue jeans. Her long black hair was tied in a loose braid, and her shoes were a little worn out. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't even look up. It was her first day at this new school. Students around her started whispering. "Who's she? She looks weird. Must be from some village." They laughed softly, thinking she couldn't hear them. But Aisha heard every word. Still, she said nothing. She just kept walking. In the classroom, the teacher smiled and introduced her. "Class, this is Aisha. She has just moved here. Let's make her feel welcome." No one clapped. No one smiled back. The teacher told her to sit in the last row. As she walked past the students, some of them giggled and pointed at her. One girl whispered loudly, "Village girl alert." Aisha sat down quietly. She opened her bag and took out a notebook. The cover was old, but inside, every page was filled with neat handwriting, drawings, and poems. When the lunch bell rang, Aisha went to the cafeteria. She stood at the back of the line, holding her small lunchbox. Others pushed past her, but she didn't mind. She found a table in the corner and sat alone. As she opened her box, 3 girls walked by. They were dressed in trendy clothes and had shiny phones in their hands. One of them, Sarah, the leader of the group, stopped in front of her. "Hey, village girl," she said with a smirk. "Is that your food? Smells weird." The other 2 laughed. One of them reached over and pushed the lunchbox. It fell to the floor, and food spilled everywhere. Aisha looked at her lunch. Then, slowly, she bent down and picked up the box. She didn't say anything. She didn't cry. She didn't even frown. She just smiled softly and wiped the box clean. Sarah rolled her eyes. What a freak. The girls walked away, laughing loudly. Back in class, the teacher gave an assignment. "I want everyone to write a short story or a poem," she said. "It can be about anything. Use your imagination." Aisha raised her hand slowly. The class turned to look at her. "Yes, Aisha," the teacher asked kindly. "Can I write it in my own way?" Aisha asked in a quiet voice. The teacher nodded. "Of course, just be creative." Some students snickered. What would she even write about? One boy whispered, "Cows and farms." But Aisha didn't listen to them. She opened her notebook and started writing. Her eyes were calm. Her hand moved fast. It was like she was writing from her heart. No one knew that Aisha had a gift. She had been writing since she was a child. Poems, stories, thoughts. She had filled many notebooks. Writing was her escape, her safe place. She wrote when she was happy, and she wrote even more when she was sad. Her words had power. But no one at this school knew that. Not yet. As the day ended, Aisha walked home slowly. The sun was setting, and the streets were quiet. She looked up at the sky and took a deep breath. "They don't know me," she whispered to herself. "But one day they will." That night, she sat at her small wooden desk and opened her notebook again. Her hands moved quickly, writing a poem about strength, about silence, about standing tall even when the world tries to push you down. The next morning, she walked back into the school, just as quiet as before. But deep inside, something had changed. She was ready. The next day at school started like the last. Aisha walked into the classroom quietly. She sat at her desk in the last row, opened her notebook, and began writing. She didn't talk to anyone. She didn't try to fit in. And for some reason, that made her stand out even more. The students didn't stop. In fact, the teasing only grew worse. "Look at her, always writing like she's some big author. Maybe she's writing love letters to trees." Another joked. Laughter filled the classroom. But Aisha stayed silent. She didn't even look up. Later that day, she went to her locker. But when she opened it, her books were torn. Pages were ripped out and thrown around. Someone had written on the inside of the locker with red marker, "Go back to your village." For a few seconds, Aisha just stared at it. Her hands shook slightly, but she took a deep breath. Then she picked up every paper, every piece, and placed them back in her bag. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just whispered, "I'll keep going." In the hallway, one boy saw the whole thing. His name was Zane. Zane wasn't like the others. He wasn't part of the popular group, but he wasn't bullied either. He kept to himself and loved reading stories. That day, he watched Aisha walk away with her torn books, and something in his heart moved. At lunch, Aisha sat alone again. Her food was simple, just rice and vegetables. Some students passed by and made faces. She eats like she's in a cartoon. Maybe her family doesn't even own a fridge. More laughter. But Aisha didn't even blink. She ate her food quietly. Zane couldn't stop thinking about her. Later that day, he went to the library. To his surprise, Aisha was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. She had her notebook open, her pen moving fast. But her face looked different now. There were tears in her eyes. She was trying to wipe them away before anyone saw. Zane walked over slowly and stood near the shelf behind her. He didn't say anything. He just watched. After a while, Aisha closed her notebook, wiped her tears, and looked outside. The sky was cloudy. It looked like rain was coming. Zane stepped forward. "You're writing. Is it about them?" Aisha turned quickly. She hadn't noticed him there. For a moment, she looked scared, like he was going to say something mean too. But Zane's face was calm. She nodded slowly. "Sometimes. I like stories," he said quietly. "I read a lot." Aisha gave a small smile. "Stories are safe. In stories, people listen." Zane sat down beside her. "Can I read one?" Aisha hesitated. Then, slowly, she tore out a page and gave it to him. The poem was short but deep. It spoke about being a tree in a storm, standing still while the world tries to break you. It was raw, full of emotion. Zane read it twice. "This is beautiful," he said. "No one else thinks so," she replied softly. "They're not reading," Zane said. "They're just laughing because they're afraid to feel." For the first time, Aisha's eyes lit up, not fully, but like a tiny candle had been lit inside her. That evening, something else happened. The school announced a poetry competition. Students were told to submit one poem. The winner would perform it on stage during the school's cultural event. Most students weren't interested. But Aisha, she saw it as something more. Hope, a way to be heard. She went home and pulled out her best notebook, the one with the soft leather cover. It was full of her most emotional work, the poems no one had ever read. She stayed up all night, reading and rewriting. She chose one poem, a piece about loneliness, strength, and finding your own light when the world stays dark. The next day, she placed it in the submission box. Sarah, the bully leader, saw her. "You? In the contest," she said, laughing loudly. "Are you going to cry on stage, village girl?" Her friends laughed too. But Aisha didn't respond. She just smiled and walked away. Zane saw everything. He walked over to Sarah and said, "Maybe you should read her poem before laughing." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Why would I read trash?" But deep inside, a tiny crack appeared, a small doubt. Later that week, the list of finalists was posted on the notice board. There it was. Finalist, Aisha Khan. The hallway went quiet for a moment. Students stared. Some looked confused. Others looked shocked. Sarah's smile faded. Zane smiled to himself. And Aisha? She looked at the list, took a breath, and whispered, "Let them hear me now." The school auditorium buzzed with noise. It was the day of the poetry competition. Students filled the seats, chatting and laughing. Some came just to skip class. Others came to support their friends. But no one expected anything from Aisha. Not really. She's actually going to speak, someone whispered. I bet she'll freeze on stage, another added. In the corner, Aisha stood quietly, holding a folded sheet of paper in her hands. Her heart beat fast. Her fingers trembled. But her eyes stayed calm. Zayn stood beside her, offering a quiet nod of support. You'll do great, he said. I've never spoken in front of so many people, Aisha whispered. You've written from your heart. That's all that matters. She nodded slowly. Deep down, fear twisted inside her. Not fear of people, but fear of not being heard. Fear of her words being laughed at again. The announcer called her name. Aisha Khan, grade 10. The hall fell into silence. All eyes turned toward the stage. Aisha took one small step, then another and another. Her shoes echoed on the wooden floor. She climbed the stairs and stood behind the microphone. A bright light shone on her face. Her paper shook in her hand. She looked out. Rows and rows of faces stared at her, some smiling, some bored, some waiting to laugh. She closed her eyes for a second. She remembered her mother's voice from long ago, whispering, "Your words are your wings." A deep breath. Then she opened her eyes. And she began. I come from silence, from long nights with no reply, from words kept inside, because no one wanted to hear my cry. They laughed at my voice, because it didn't sound like theirs. They broke my books, but they couldn't tear my prayers. They called me names, thought I was weak. But strength isn't loud. Sometimes strength doesn't speak. As her voice filled the hall, something strange happened. The laughter stopped. The whispers faded. And then, silence. The kind of silence that listens. The poem continued, every word a blade cutting through judgment, every line a light shining through the darkness. By the end, no one moved. No one blinked. When Aisha finished, she looked down, folded her paper, and stepped back from the microphone. For one moment, the room stayed still. Then, a single clap. Then another. And suddenly, loud applause filled the hall. Some students stood up. Some had tears in their eyes. Even a few teachers clapped with deep emotion. Zayn smiled wide. But at the back of the room, Sarah's hand stayed still. Her face was frozen in shock. She couldn't understand how the village girl had done this, how she had captured everyone without makeup, fashion, or loud friends. Just her words. Later that day, the results were announced. First place, Aisha Khan. The crowd cheered again. Some students walked up to her in the hallway. That was amazing. I felt that in my heart. You're really talented. Aisha nodded politely, still quiet, still calm. But inside, something was blooming. Confidence. The first spark. After school, Zayn found her sitting under a tree with her notebook. You were incredible, he said. I was just honest, she replied. That's why it worked. Aisha looked up at the sky, a small smile on her lips. For the first time, they didn't just see me. They heard me. He nodded. They won't forget. But even as she celebrated, a feeling stayed in the background. A whisper that the battle wasn't over. The bullies hadn't given up. And now, they were watching her even closer. Because now, the girl they used to laugh at had a voice. And it was powerful. Aisha's victory spread fast. By the next morning, almost everyone at school had heard her poem or read it online. A student had recorded her performance and uploaded it. The video got shared in class groups, on social media, and even teachers talked about it in the staff room. Did you hear that poem? That village girl, she's amazing. Suddenly, the girl who was once invisible was now seen. But not everyone liked that. Especially not Sarah. Sarah had ruled the school for years. Fashion queen, social media star, leader of the cool group. People followed her. They feared her. But now, someone else had attention, and it burned her inside. How can people like her? She snapped to her friends. She wears the same shirt every week. She doesn't even wear makeup, one friend added. She's just pretending to be deep, said another. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Let's see how deep she really is. That day, as Aisha walked to her locker, she saw a note stuck to it. If you're so talented, prove it. Open mic. Live crowd. This Friday. No name. No smiley face. Just cold, black ink. Zane read it too. They're trying to humiliate you. I know, Aisha said softly. You don't have to do it. Aisha looked at the note again. Her hand didn't shake this time. No, I want to do it. Zane looked surprised. You do? She nodded. They've laughed at me from the shadows. I want to stand in the light. The next few days were quiet, but full of tension. Whispers followed Aisha in the halls. Did you hear? She's doing the open mic. I hope she messes up. She won't last 2 minutes. But Aisha stayed calm. After school, she went to the library or sat under the tree with her notebook, writing in silence. Even Zane noticed something different in her now. She didn't seem nervous. She seemed focused. On Friday, the school set up the auditorium again. It wasn't an official event, but the students came anyway, more than expected. They wanted drama. They wanted a show. Sarah sat in the front row with her group, phone in hand, ready to record. Zane sat in the back, silently praying for Aisha's courage to hold. The mic was turned on. The first few students read love poems or funny lines. The crowd clapped politely but didn't pay much attention. Then the teacher announced, "Next, we have Aisha Khan." A few students whispered. Some rolled their eyes. Sarah smirked. But Aisha walked up calmly. She wore the same simple clothes. Her notebook was in her hand, but her voice, when it spoke, was strong. I was told I don't belong here, she began. That I'm not like everyone else. A few laughs echoed from the crowd. She didn't stop. They said my clothes were old. My words were boring. My dreams were too big. Now the room quieted. But I never asked to fit in. I came here to learn. And I learned something important. She paused, then looked up. The people who laugh the loudest are often the most afraid. Now the silence was heavy. Afraid that someone without money, without style, without followers, could still shine. Gasps, whispers. They tried to make me feel small, but words don't need height. They fly. And mine, they're just getting started. She stepped back. The room stayed frozen. Then someone clapped. Then more. And suddenly, thunderous applause. Even some of the students who had laughed before were now standing. A few teachers had walked in too, surprised at the crowd, and even more surprised by what they heard. But Sarah, she didn't clap. Her hands stayed tight around her phone. She had recorded the whole thing, but now the plan had backfired. People weren't mocking Aisha. They were admiring her. Later that day, Sarah walked past Aisha in the hall. You think you're something now, she hissed. Aisha didn't even stop walking. She just said, I don't think I am. I know I am. Sarah's face turned red, but Aisha was already gone. That evening, Zane met Aisha by the tree again. You did it, he said. She smiled softly. No, this was just the start. And somewhere inside her notebook, the next poem waited. Because Aisha knew something now. They could throw words at her, but she had learned how to throw them back, with truth, with grace, and with power. The days after the open mic felt different. Everywhere Aisha walked, heads turned. But now, it wasn't because people were laughing. It was because they were watching. Some with respect, some with quiet curiosity, and some with envy. Sarah and her group had grown quiet, but not because they had given up. No, they were planning something darker. One morning, Aisha opened her locker and found something new inside. A fake award certificate. Best Drama Queen. For crying her way to fame. It was signed with laughing emojis. She sighed and crumpled it up. Her hands didn't shake anymore. She knew who it was from. The same people who had once ignored her were now trying to bring her down again. Zayn saw it too. "They're getting desperate," he said. Aisha smiled faintly. "That means I'm getting stronger." But that afternoon, things went too far. When Aisha reached home, her mother looked worried. She held up her phone with a message open on the screen. "Did you post this?" she asked. It was a screenshot of a poem. Except it wasn't hers. It was edited, twisted, made to look like Aisha had written something rude and insulting about her classmates. And now it was spreading fast online, with Aisha's name on it. "Everyone's saying you hate the school," her mother said quietly. "That you call the other students empty minds with pretty faces." Aisha's heart sank. "That's not mine. Someone changed my poem." She rushed to school the next morning. But it was too late. Whispers followed her again, but not curious ones. This time, they were angry. "She thinks she's better than us. She's calling us fake now. She's always been full of herself." Even some of the students who had clapped for her at the open mic now avoided her. Teachers frowned at her in the hallway. It was like she had fallen. Hard. Sarah watched it all with a small, cold smile. She had done it. Finally, the village girl was falling apart again. Zayn tried to help. "We can tell them the truth. Show your original poem. Explain it all." But Aisha shook her head. "They don't want the truth right now. They want someone to blame." "But you didn't do anything." "I did something," she said softly. "I stood up. And now they're afraid of me." Zayn looked at her. "So what will you do now?" Aisha looked down at her notebook. Her poems were still there. Her heart was still full of fire. "I'll write," she said, "but not to explain. I'll write because I must." That night, Aisha wrote a new poem. Not for school, not for the bullies, but for herself. She called it "The Mirror." "They tried to break my image, with lies and twisted words. But I never needed their mirror. I always knew who I was. They wanted me to fall, so they could feel tall. But I'm made of roots, and roots don't fear storms. Let them speak, let them twist. I write with fire, not for fame, but for truth." Aisha didn't post the poem. She just kept it. The next day at school, she didn't speak much. She walked through the halls with her head high, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the fake smiles. Because something inside her had shifted. She no longer needed their approval. She no longer waited for them to understand her. She had her words, her truth, and her strength. Zayn noticed it too. "You're not even angry," he said. "No," Aisha replied. "I've seen who they are. Now, I want to show them who I really am." And that was the turning point. Not when she won the prize. Not when she spoke on stage. But now, when she lost the crowd, but kept her voice. When they tried to shame her, and she chose to stay true. Because Aisha had learned the real lesson. Fame fades. Applause fades. But self-respect, that stays forever. Weeks passed. The false post still floated around, but its power was fading. People had stopped sharing it. Some even started questioning it. Did she really write that? It didn't even sound like her style. Aisha had said nothing. She hadn't defended herself online. She hadn't fought back with anger. Instead, she had grown. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. She focused on her studies, helped in class, and stayed kind. Even when others whispered, she walked past them with calm eyes and a steady heart. But quietly, behind the scenes, she was rising. One day, her English teacher approached her. "Aisha, I've read your old poems. You have something rare, a real voice." Aisha blinked. "Thank you, Mom. I want to send your work to a national student writing contest. Will you allow me?" Aisha hesitated. What if they don't like it? The teacher smiled. "You once asked if you could write in your own way. That way brought you here. Trust it." That night, Aisha stayed up late, reading all her poems. Some were raw, full of pain. Others were hopeful, soft like rain. She picked 5, printed them, and gave them to her teacher the next morning. She didn't tell anyone, not even Zane. Weeks passed again. Then one afternoon during class, the school principal entered with a bright envelope. "Excuse the interruption," he said. "Aisha Khan, please come to the front." Aisha stood, confused. The principal smiled. "You've won first place. National level. Out of thousands of entries." Gasps. Whispers. Everyone stared. Aisha couldn't move. "Your poems will be printed in the National Youth Journal," he added, "and you're invited to speak at the Writers' Festival in the city." The class burst into soft applause. Even some students who had stayed silent before now clapped. A few even stood up. Zane looked at her with eyes full of pride. His smile was wide, but his eyes, they held something deeper, belief. Later that day, Sarah sat with her group in the canteen. "She just got lucky," one friend said. "She probably begged the teacher to enter her," another added. But Sarah didn't say a word. She just stared at Aisha from afar, quiet, bitter, and afraid. Because no matter how many lies she had spread, no matter how many tricks she had played, Aisha had risen, and nothing could stop her now. The Writers' Festival was held in a big hall in the city. Students from across the country had come. Some wore fancy clothes, some carried thick folders, but Aisha wore her same simple dress and held only her small notebook. When her turn came, she walked to the stage, just like before. But this time, she wasn't scared. She stood tall, confident, free. "I come from silence, but silence taught me to listen. I come from shadows, but shadows helped me find the light. They called me weak, but I was growing roots. And now, I've bloomed, not to impress, but to express. This is my voice, and it doesn't ask for space. It creates its own." When she finished, the crowd rose to their feet, a standing ovation. Aisha smiled, not the soft, shy smile she used to wear. This smile was different. It was full of pride, of freedom, of peace. Later, when she stepped off the stage, a young girl from another school came running up to her. "Your poem, it felt like you were telling my story," the girl said with tears in her eyes. Aisha gently took her hand. "Then maybe it's our story now." And that's when Aisha truly understood something. Her words were not just for her. They were for every quiet girl who had ever been laughed at, every child who had felt invisible, every soul who had been told they were less. She was their voice, and her voice was just getting louder. The school year was ending. Final exams, yearbook photos, and farewell events filled the air with excitement. For Aisha, everything had changed. She was no longer the girl sitting alone. Now others asked to sit with her. But Aisha remained the same, kind, soft-spoken, and focused. She still wrote under the tree. She still helped classmates who struggled. She had earned respect not by shouting, but by standing strong. Still, something unfinished lingered in the air. Something unspoken. Sarah. Since Aisha's national award, Sarah had stayed quiet. She had stopped mocking, stopped spreading rumors, but not once had she apologized. One day, Aisha stayed late after class to clean the blackboard. As she turned to leave, she saw Sarah standing at the doorway alone. Their eyes met. Sarah walked in slowly, her steps heavy. "I didn't come to fight," she said. Aisha said nothing. She waited. "I just wanted to say, I thought making fun of you would keep me on top. But the more you rose, the smaller I felt." Aisha blinked, surprised. Sarah looked down. "I spread that fake post. I edited your poem. I made people laugh at you. And you never hit back. You just kept going." Silence. Then Aisha spoke calmly. "Why now?" Sarah shrugged. "Because no one remembers me anymore. But they remember you. and it's because you had something real. Aisha looked at her, not with anger, but with deep calm. Hurting people doesn't make you strong, she said. It just shows where you're broken. Sarah bit her lip. Her eyes glistened. I'm sorry. Aisha nodded. Thank you for saying that. It was quiet. Then Aisha stepped forward and gently placed a folded paper in Sarah's hand. What's this? Sarah asked. A poem, Aisha said. It's about forgiveness. Maybe you'll understand it. Sarah looked confused, but nodded. She left the room, slowly, almost lighter. At the school farewell event, students gave speeches. Some cried, some laughed. Teachers spoke of memories and growth. Then the principal stepped forward. Before we close, he said, one last message from a student who taught us all what real strength looks like. Aisha was called to the stage. This time, no one whispered. This time, no one laughed. Only silence, and eyes full of respect. Aisha stepped to the mic. I was once the girl no one saw, the one with quiet shoes and loud dreams. You laughed. I listened. You pushed. I stood. You told me I didn't belong. But here I am. Not to prove you wrong, but to prove myself right. To those who are still hiding, still hurting, still unheard, know this. You are not alone. You don't have to shout. Just speak. You don't have to fight. Just rise. Because strength is not in your volume. It's in your voice. The hall erupted into applause. Some students were crying. Even teachers wiped their eyes. Zayn smiled from the crowd, his eyes shining with quiet pride. And somewhere near the back, Sarah stood, holding Aisha's poem in her hand. That night, Aisha walked home under the stars, her notebook pressed to her chest. She had come to the school as the village girl. She was leaving as something far more powerful. A voice, a light, a quiet storm. And her story would live on in the hearts of every person who had ever been broken, then chose to rise.